welcome back to the Innovfest Unbound main stage. We've got some treats for you this afternoon, and we'll be finishing off with the spectacular, always spectacular, Unilever Foundry Startup Battle, so make sure you stay to the bitter end. Next up, for a panel living in a hyper-connected, smarter world, please welcome to the stage Charles Ross of The Economist and his panel. Please put your hands together. Thank you.
Please come up. Thank you very much. Please come up and join me.
Thank you.
Excellent. Good afternoon, everybody. We've almost got a full room, not quite. Encourage more people to come in. If there's anybody outside milling around, now is the time to join us. Otherwise, you're going to miss out on all the action. And there will be a lot of action. We've just been having a few chats backstage, and there's a lot of opinions on this panel. It's going to be hard to compress them into 35 minutes. It'll be quite the challenge. But let me start by introducing my fine panelists. First, we have Jenny Lee, who is the managing partner of GGV Capital, directly here on my left. GGV are an investor with a social good, I think you're telling me before. Excellent. Welcome, Jenny. Next, we have Jitender Khurana from Signify, formerly of Philips Lighting, who will provide a good technology perspective to our discussions today. Next, we have Paul Scanlan, who is the CTO of Huawei Technologies, again, providing a technology perspective, but also some good insight into data flows, speed of networks, these types of things, the hyper-connected cities, which we are discussing here today. And last but not least, we have Chen Wei from SocialCredit, which is a firm you may not have heard of. I looked them up before this panel, and you're a firm which blends finance and technology for a sustainable future. Very grand mission indeed. I look forward to hearing a bit more about that as well. For those of you that haven't read the synopsis of this panel, what we're here to discuss is living in a hyper-connected, smarter world. And essentially what we want to get to the bottom of here is this idea that our cities are under stress. They're being strained by hyper-urbanization, which is leading to mass overcrowding, traffic issues, high property prices, poor pollution, stress on our healthcare systems. All of these elements are forcing our cities to change, to adapt, to rethink the way that they operate. And one of the big things we're doing, and we're going to discuss here today, is the role of technology in helping to ease some of those pain points within our city. So we've got 33 minutes left. Hopefully we can solve this problem of overcrowded cities here in Asia and think about really what's the difference between Southeast Asia and the rest of the world. Do we have some advantages here or not? How do we need to do things differently? So let me kick off, Jenny, with you, if I may. Always good to start with the challenges. Let's work out what the problem is here we're trying to address. So I wonder if you could just spend a few moments just talking to us about some of those key challenges we have here in Southeast Asia, whether they're different to other parts of the world, which pain points we might see here in the region. Thank you, Jenny.
You know, I have to confess, I'm more of an expert on the US and China market about Southeast Asia.
It's okay, we can learn from China.
But I think in terms of the problem that you highlighted a very scary environment.
The dystopian view of the future. It's always a nice one.
That's right. But never fear, because I think technology can save the world. So when we think about the smart city, maybe specifically on the smart city, what are the key challenges? So in my view, we've been tracking the technology sector, investing in this sector for over the last 20 years. In my view, when we talk about smart city, it is not one specific technology, it is not one specific product. If you look at the availability of sensors that's out there, the sensors, all kinds of sensors, outdoor sensors, indoor sensors, environmental sensors, I think they are at a point where they are affordable, the resolution is available, and you can source from a global perspective. If you think about the software, and we hear from many different startups, the ability using the sensors to collect the data and then to process this data, the processing power is also now at the right time where you can leverage computing power to do the processing. So I think it's not a technology issue. I think what's an issue that every country faces when they think about smart city is a definition issue. Is, you know, how do you scope an issue? What do you mean by smart city? Is it security first? Is it safety first? Is it productivity first? And so I think what's What's needed is that every different countries that we've seen may have a different definition of what drives that need for a smart city. And so the ability to sandbox and have use cases where all these different disparate products, different sensors, technology can come together to form a viable end solution is where I see the challenges is. And this same solution that may work in Singapore may not work in Malaysia, where the actual situation and environment is different. So not so much a tech nightmare, but I think it is an integration and definition nightmare.
Just want to pick up on one of your points. You said that sort of the future of smart cities is not a processing problem. It's not not limited by technological issues. But I was speaking to somebody late last year who said that we can really only make smart cities work when we get quantum computing working, because that's the only thing which is going to have enough processing power to be able to run and coordinate our smart cities in the future. Does anybody agree or disagree with that? Paul, do you have a view on quantum computing? Do we have enough power at the moment to power our smart cities?
I think, first of all, I think you're absolutely right. So first part is the definition, but there's a governance problem, all right? And everybody has because there are so many definitions, what problem are you trying to solve? You know, basically, where's the money? Yeah, where's the money? But the first thing we've learned, and you've mentioned particularly in China and safe city projects, we believe in Huawei that if a city is not safe, forget about doing anything else. It's never going to be smart. So that's why we tend to try to do things from safe first. But let's just think about three probably technology components that will allow smart cities to become what we think they ought to be. And the first one I'll talk about, because there is a lot of hype, it's about 5G. And it's not about being fast or the low latency or anything like that. But what's important is that first you need everything to be connected. All right? So not people, everything. The water bottles, the lamp posts, the traffic lights, the car, everything. Your shoes, your books, your pens, the mics, everything needs to be connected. I'll give you an example of why and where it would make sense and where the value is. You mentioned about traffic problems. So if everything's connected, and now you need to catch the plane, don't you, Charles, in about an hour or so, and
yep.
Mine's coming up after that. But you don't need to leave now, because your phone will beep in 3 minutes, because it knows where Jenny and Jitter's going and I'm going and Wei's going, and it'll say you can leave in 3 minutes. It knows how long it takes you to walk downstairs, hop in your car, drive to there, multiplex all the other cars, cross where you're going to cross at the intersection, because it knows what everybody's doing. It knows what everybody's doing. Now, the only way that happens is everything's connected. But by itself, it's only one component of enablement. And you mentioned also, Jenny, about the intelligence or the understanding. And you can talk about this AI capability. So there's nothing really special about AI, quite frankly. A lot of the algorithms have been thought of and written. But what's allowing things to happen today are two components of technology. One is the cost and the scale of processing power and the storage and the cheapness of these things to store the data. So first you've got to connect it all to collect the data. You've got to be able to warehouse it cheaply, securely, privately. But now you need the processing power and the algorithms to make proper decisions to improve life or improve traffic or improve health, whatever the target is. Now, this specific question you're asking, do we have enough computing power? If you did it by itself, raw computing power, you would have challenges. And that's why there are companies who are manufacturing AI-based chips. Huawei is one example. There are other good companies like NVIDIA and others who are doing this similar types of things. So you have a choice. You can put it in a big-scale computer and put parallel processors, the old super craze in the old days, or the IBMs, etc. You can use the Watson ideas. You can build AI chips and try and put it and distribute it and try and do it a different way. Quantum solves different types of problems. Just as classic computers, the x86 solves different types of computers, and RISC processors do different things. So the good news is that they're becoming ubiquitous, they're becoming cheaper, they're becoming more powerful, and you have the AI processing chips. And the third one is the concept of cloud. And why cloud is important is because it allows anybody here to put things onto the cloud and other people to use the cloud flexibly and also to get different services that you can start making life better.
I want to touch on one of the points you made, which was this idea that everything needs to be connected. Everybody likes to talk about this, the water bottle connected, and think about the value that will bring to us and our society. And I know Signify, you're moving into or have moved into the IoT space quite heavily, but you're doing something quite quite interesting in terms of looking at existing infrastructure and sort of retrofitting that to make it smart. Because this is not about, smart cities are not just about building everything new and fresh from scratch. We absolutely need to think about the old existing infrastructure and how we can upscale it and improve it.
Yeah, thanks. I think we have to, of course, look at smart city, considering that the cost optimization, the processing powers, a lot of these elements have already made the deployments today far more attractive, and it has started to make a lot more economic sense. While of course there are overarching, ambitions of improving the usability, improving the experiential elements, driving efficiency improvements, etc., etc. Now, of course, I think often the smart cities are often looked at from a more greenfield perspective, and I think that's in some sense suboptimal, because it's not always the best, because there is a huge infrastructure which already is available, and if you start to treat those infrastructures and start to apply the new age technologies, then I think you start to optimize the existing infrastructure in a way where you can also reap all the benefits of technology, whether those are driving efficiencies or cost optimizations, user experiences, and those kind of things. So I think it has to be a holistic approach. It cannot just be silo approach on the greenfield itself, and that's why retrofitting brownfields opportunities are equally interesting. And I think important is when we talk of urbanization, there is such a heavy load on the cities itself, and if we say that cities of today generally are consuming 75% of the energy in the world, then that also means that what the cities of today, you need to start treating them also with the technology what you have, and you have to start applying that in a retrofit in a much bigger way. Now, there are a lot of studies on that context. There was one of the very interesting ones which came from the World Green Building Council, which said there is about $1 trillion potential savings if all the buildings in the world would change from the current state to the new technology and embrace the new technologies. So that's a huge, humongous savings. And often we try to wait for major upgradation cycles, but sometimes there are low-hanging fruits. There are some quick wins which can actually be taken up at a much regular pace to actually start leveraging some of these opportunities and technology options what we have.
Interesting. Just sort of staying on the challenges, the pain points, the things we're trying to fix here. Wei, I wonder if, I know you're doing some work in the healthcare space across here in Singapore and also across the region. This is one of the things I mentioned in my opening, that the healthcare system is being strained because of overpopulation and all the challenges associated with that. What role does sort of technology play in your view, and what have you been doing to take some of those pain points away from the healthcare system, to give it more capacity, allow it to be more responsive?
Sure. So if we look at the purpose of the smart city, really now we evolved from version 1.0 as building the infrastructure, now to the version 2.0 that we want to make the life of the citizens or whoever, or the enterprises, a better quality of service and etc. So in our space, actually, we use AI technology to increase efficiency and accuracy. So which means those best doctors in the hospital, usually their capability is restricted because they can only read 100 images a day. That's it. But now we can use the technology to increase their capability. Now they can read 3,000 or 4,000 images a day. So what we can do now with the actual capability, we actually use the smart city connections to export the capability to a more remote areas. Now we have either use a mobile phone. Now we can take a picture of the ultrasound and upload it to the cloud. And they have now the doctor with the help of AI now can help with the diagnosis. And even those devices, we have these devices in the community, and the patients or even just who care about their health in general can go to those devices and upload their images. So with the hyper-connected world, either with mobile phone or use the internet or use those actual machines, we export the capability to more places. And also, besides that, we have some wearable devices For a very simple example, that micturition is one of the most misdiagnosed symptoms. And now the people can just take those wearable devices home and gather all the data by themselves and upload it to the cloud. Then we can return a very accurate diagnosis and even recommend some treatment. Yeah, so we use those technology, those connections to help people get better medical resources.
It's interesting the way you're describing that. I've had a lot of conversations with companies over the last couple of months who were all lauding the benefits of AI, but none of them are actually getting sort of genuine benefits out of it yet. We're still sort of yet to reach that sort of phase of getting proper value out of AI, but it sounds like you're doing that. You're doing that in healthcare. Are we seeing some difference country by country, or is Singapore taking the lead? Who's sort of leading the way here in Asia in that respect?
Right. We
Or
definitely.
China, of course.
Oh.
Maybe you can talk to that afterwards.
Yeah, I'm sorry. We definitely see the differences in different countries. Particularly for the smart city in China, it's very government-driven. Most of the projects are initiated by the Chinese government. But in the US, we see a mix of government and the private sectors. From business perspective, I still think, because those are the market, how we utilize the data to make a better life for citizens, those are the market. They should be open to more companies, private sector company or government agent, that they can develop those applications to make it better.
You talk about a lot of the China initiatives obviously being backed by the Chinese government, which raises this question that these things can't be done on their own. It's not just a private-led initiative. It has to be sort of supported by the public institutions as well. So private partnership, collaboration. Interested to know how that works for some of you. Whether you've got some examples here, and maybe I'll ask you as well, Paul, because I know Huawei is obviously a global company, having to deal with very different countries around the world, and partnering with them in many respects. So, do you want to pause? Shall you think about your answer, and I ask Jenny first? Okay, you go first, Jenny.
Yeah, so maybe I can share the trends that we've seen in China over the last 5 to 10 years with regards to the build-up of smart city, and I think some of that trends will translate to Asia. So I think in China, what happens first is digitization, right? So the general population, the 1 billion, 1.4 billion went online, and the online, it's not just PC, but also mobile. And so mobile, being the huge computing device out there, allows now all kinds of information, whether it's government data, health data, information, traffic data. I think that's the first wave that happened. So it's the necessary ingredient that needs to happen, which is everyone has a supercomputing device that allows them to tap in anywhere on the cloud. China is now, with the help of Huawei, going to 5G, already in 5G. And so network, infrastructure, data, digitization, that's virtual data. The second wave that we have seen is that we then start to see the actual physical element being built. China today, I think some of the cities, Beijing probably has 600,000 cameras in the city, inner city itself. So the physical infrastructure, then it's about physical sensors that's there, whether it's to collect video data, facial feeds, voice. And so you need to have sensors that's enough of a high density to really create a good use case. Now, the physical expansion we have seen has gone from public services to now individual industrial application. So when we talk about how do we save electricity, we have seen companies that are now inserting sensors all the way to the furnace, where the source of the start. And therefore, it's now about sustainability. How do I now get enough sensors into each of these vertical areas? Is it the furnace? Is it the meters? So that every single point, from whether it's water utility or electricity, they now start to have structured data as well. So that's the second phase that we're seeing, which is ongoing today in a huge way, definitely with the support of the government as well. And I think then the third wave is where we now see basically computing ability, right? Then AI comes in. AI is always slow to the game. They've been slow for 50 years. Maybe they are here now. And so the ability for compute power, the right algorithm to now be able to make this structured data into actionable data. Can we now save energy better? can we now divert this water to a better way? Is it better to divert waste management? So we actually see all three phases. Unfortunately, I think smart city cannot happen with the help of only one private company. It does have to work with the government, the policies. It may have to start with sandboxing, but we do need to have, what we have seen is that you do need to give it that time for each of this layer to be in place before you can get real productivity and use cases.
Yeah.
Excellent.
So I'm trying to think, Charles, you know, which case study should we pick, you know? We could start with just talking about the basic connectivity and how Singapore 10 years ago went from maybe 6 or 7 in ICT to number 1 and number 2 in pretty much every sector. We're proud to say that that's because of fibre-based communications throughout Singapore that was done by us in 2 years. You have other countries that are still taking a long time, even though they aspire to do those things. But Singapore is able to do it through some collaboration and trust with a certain vendor and also government policy, so regulatory policy, and we could do it. But let me give you two other very bizarre examples, extreme. So one is facial recognition of fish. It's agriculture. So we're using 5G not to change and provide speed to the people. I'm not interested in that. What we're interested in is identifying for all the fish farms, which is the second biggest industry in Norway, and building 5G base stations all along the coast to provide connectivity directly to the fish farms. Because now we can offer 4G cameras instead of 1K cameras. That means we can identify lice and other parasites on the fish, so we get a better yield of fish by about 4 or 5%. We can save the manpower required to collect all the information and read the data for a range of reasons. We need, instead of fiber optic cables and everything, so we're using 5G. So we save about $150 million in manpower. And then we save about 20% of the food because we're able to stop feeding the fish when we can see that the fish stop eating it. So this is an example at one end. Now, that can only happen, as you mentioned, through collaboration. You need connectivity, you need collaboration. You need the partners to understand that there's a bigger fish to fry, right, than everybody trying to do it by themselves. I could take another extreme example in Rwanda. So despite the Amazons and the other companies trying to think about how do we get drones to get this and deliver a package, in Rwanda they already deliver, to your point, emergency medical supplies, in fact, organs by drones. Rwanda. There's no plastic, by the way, in Rwanda, in case you didn't know that. It's the cleanest city in the world. Rwanda. Why can some countries and governments do it and others cannot? But over there in a country like this, they use a digital health app. So they don't need to go to the doctor. They can't, first of all. It's too far. There aren't enough medical practitioners. So they use AI-based apps on a phone. That needs AI. That needs medical practitioners to feed the information, to collect to prepare how do we engage, what's the right process for diagnosis. Yes, it's not just Mickey Mouse. It's a real AI system behind it. You need what we discussed with the connection, whether it's 3 or 4 or 5G in the future. And then you need data privacy and things to protect the data to understand. Rwanda, right? Singapore, Norway, as examples of things that maybe Huawei's done, but collaboration, governance models, vision, looking at a bigger and better picture. But I like your point, Wei, about where we can make a difference. We can make a difference in 3 areas. One I've just mentioned, agriculture, all right? So the connectivity will improve agriculture together with some AI. In energy, my estimates, 33 and 9 zeros kilowatt hours of energy the planet can save. That's about a 100 megawatt power reactor per country if we just do 5G properly and remove the 2, 3, and 4G, right? That's a 100 megawatt power reactor in every country if you do it properly. But over here in the health industry, which is probably the biggest consumer of funds, the most complicated area, if we can collect enough data through not just monitoring people, but also all the manufacturers, the drug companies, all the research companies, and put all this together and collaborate, we're going to fix cancer, okay? We're going to live forever. And it need not be that far in the future. But it requires a couple of principles: privacy, governance, the right data model sharing, the right collaboration between companies rather than the fighting and the withholding this and those sorts of things. That's a very different problem to solve. That's at the heart of this thing called smart cities.
Yep. You've painted the holy grail of what we need in the future. And touch on one of your points. You said that if we do this right, I was in Mumbai earlier this week, and a few of the guys I was there talking to were saying they were very excited about Mumbai because they were saying that we're really going to be able to benefit from this leapfrog effect because we rolled out 3G and it was good, but we're essentially then going to leap onto 5G and leapfrog all of that other infrastructure which had already been rolled out in the Western world, if you like. So this is something which is quite commonly said about Asia, which is said about this part of the world in growing developed markets, that we can leapfrog over that aging infrastructure.
Yes.
So do we genuinely have that advantage here? Are countries making the most of that? Are they doing it? Do you have a view on that?
Yeah, so I think just building on what just Paul said, and I think the discussion so far. So I think it's all about how we get the scalability, right? Means I think we have got the foundational elements fairly well fixed. I think it's all about now scalability. And scalability, of course, there is a lot of elements. And I think one of the very fundamentals is, of course, the solution itself has to make economic sense. That's certainly one of the very fundamental elements. So there has to be a certain economic sense of what solutions are being offered. And once that starts to make a promising sense, I think the scalability comes. And once the scalability comes, I think then whether it is a tier 1 city or 2 or 3, and sometimes even a lower rung cities can also start to embrace that and in fact start to catch up much faster than what you would otherwise think. And I think in the smart city deployments, largely we must look at those aspects also, because if we start to also get the tier 3s moved up to 2 and 2s to 1, then we also solve in some sense the chronic problem of the urbanization itself, when the tier 1 cities are so congested and so heavily abused from a resource perspective. So I think the scalability aspects are very critical, and economic benefits of the whole solution becomes one of the very fundamental elements of the scalability itself. I think another one, just to build on what Paul said, I think collaboration and interactions are very critical. Collaborations more in the ecosystem and interactions between the different verticals, different systems is so critical to actually reap the most benefit of any IoT or any smart deployments at whatever scale we are talking about. So those are some of those very fundamental examples. And just to quote you some very basic requirements or case studies itself. I mean, we being Philips, lighting globally, we were 120 years old. Now we got named as Signify. We are now, of course, leading the IoT transformation in the lighting industry. And we, in some sense, recognize that interactions are so important. Lighting is ubiquitous. Everywhere you see, you have a lighting over your head. If you are outside in the city, you have lighting, which is basically providing a safer environment. When you are inside, it's, of course, giving you a functional, serving your functional needs. But when we start to go from analog lighting system to a digital lighting system, we are talking about good 40, 50, 60% of energy saving. So that starts to make some economic sense. But the moment we start to integrate sensors into it, when we start to have the prospect of every lighting point, one of the most densely available network starts to collect data, and now starts to push the data from one system to the other. Now the economic sense, in some sense, gets further enhanced, and we are talking of energy savings of further 20, 30%. We are actually even talking about user experience benefits and those kind of things. A simple meeting room, if there is unoccupied, why the lights should remain on? Of course, an occupancy sensor can turn them off, but why it should only turn off the lighting? It can also send the signal to the air conditioning and actually push it 2 degrees higher. Simple interaction, simple collaboration, can benefit energy savings, from a lighting perspective, but can also give you the same savings from HVAC perspective, making buildings of today, 50, 60, 70% more energy efficient, giving better user experience, and in some sense, driving the scale.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing. Lots of nodding there, Jenny. Did you want to add anything?
Well, we talk about smart city, the question or challenges looks very big. But what we have seen, actually we've heard, is that sometimes the solution is to start small. It's like, what do we want to control lighting? Do we want to control temperature? And Paul gave a point about transportation, right? We've had drones deliver coffee in China using existing GPRS technology augmented with 5G. But
is that solving a problem, though, drone delivery of coffee?
So why? Because delivery of coffee, which is a high-frequency activity, means that if you crack the code you can then deliver organs in a much better, consistent manner. So you can start to define the problem set as a small problem set. Of course, the solution to solve that is a huge combined solution. But once that's done, you can then extend it into transporting people, transporting organs, transporting parcels as well. So think big, start with solving one.
Yes.
Our clock has been running down rapidly. I can't believe this time has gone so quickly. But maybe I can ask if we have any questions. We probably have time for one question in the audience for any of our panelists. Quickly asking, if you have a question, please put your hand up for us, for any of our fine panelists. No? No? Nothing is happening? I think, well, we have about 2 minutes left. Maybe I can touch on one last thing. I've got about 25 questions here, and I think we've covered about 4.
I told him that.
How good this conversation has been. Let's just think sort of broadly, and I'll go around the panel here and just get some last thoughts from you all. If we were to predict the future, are we happy being here in Asia, or are we going to be more resilient, our cities here, than the West? Are we better prepared for building these sustainable and safe cities for the future?
Yes, having spent the first 10 years of my life in the US, second 20 years in China, the rest will be in Asia. I think the government here are actively thinking about combining existing infrastructure with new technology, building new cities with new technology. I think the progress, the growth is actually behind us. And so I'm very excited to be here to see the next wave.
Excellent. Jit?
I would just sum it up with one line. I think the opportunity lies here. And I think there is a big opportunity. There is an opportunity not just from an economic sense, but there's also opportunity to solve real-life problems. And I think that also gives a lot of, I would say, drive for a lot of technology companies, a lot of possibilities for public and private partnerships, and really move the needle.
Excellent. Paul, do you agree? I mean, you're a global company, though. Maybe there's better opportunity in Africa or somewhere else?
Look, I think I would say all the developing market has a great opportunity, coming back to your comment about leapfrogging. But just let's pick on Asia, since we're here in Asia. But China, India, Indonesia, Philippines, you've got a huge population just in these 4 or 5 countries, Vietnam, of course, as well. But so developing countries have a need to move up. They have a real need. And necessity, the mother in invention and all those sorts of things, they have real needs and they can leapfrog. And one of the reasons they can leapfrog is because they're prepared to open the door and say, you have a good idea that you did somewhere here, did it work, did it not? They're prepared to listen to that. And in the West, we have a little bit of a different attitude, which is, no, that's fine. Maybe that worked in Zimbabwe or on, but here we do things differently and we'll go for, we'll break at 5 o'clock. You don't break at 5 o'clock in Asia. You break at 5 o'clock for work and you're removed, right? Or another person will come there and compete with you. So there's a necessity, there's competition, there's willingness to take new ideas, to look at different governance structure, and to be quite frank, to act faster. So whilst there might be a lot of innovative ideas out of Silicon Valley, quite frankly, where I live in Shenzhen, we can execute them faster and throughout Asia, because first I have a bigger market that I can take to very quickly to try and fail fast, but also I can do it a lot more cheaply to get the POCs done. So those sorts of things tell me that I think Asia really can move forward. You'll get pockets in Africa. They're doing a great job in Smart Africa and a lot of the other things there with the initiatives, and certainly the same thing in Latin America. They all have slightly different challenges.
Excellent, positive way. Do you final comments?
Yeah, I just want to share one interesting finding that actually I think the key is to break the barrier, break the isolation of different sets of data. When that happens, we find that if we combine data from different sources from the city, then we can do some very interesting applications. For example, we combine data from registration with electricity data. Now we can do credit rating of SMEs. So I think the next step of is how to explore and combine data from different sets that we develop some new business model even.
Excellent, thank you very much. We are out of time. We haven't managed to solve smart cities in the future, as I promised at the start, but I think we've got some way towards finding out that Asia is a great place to be great place for looking at smart cities, and our cities are in pretty good shape because there's that sort of that drive, that innovative flair within these cities, and these public-private partnerships are going to come together and hopefully create these smart and sustainable cities in the future. So I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you everybody for coming. We had a full house here today. Please join me in thanking our panelists. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to the panel.